All right, so today we are diving deep into the world of psychology.
Ooh,
It
excited.
is fascinating stuff, right?
Always.
We are tackling this lecture transcript today. It's by Ramón Nogueras, and he has this really thought-provoking idea. He calls it the mind is flat.
Okay.
I know, before you start picturing like a pancake brain, it's not about that when he says flat. He's talking about this idea that we have all this hidden depth to our minds, like a deeply layered unconscious and all that. But Nogueras, he's suggesting it's not necessarily like that. He says our mental experience, what we think and feel, it's mostly created in the moment, on the fly almost.
That challenges a lot of traditional thinking about the mind, doesn't it?
Totally.
Yeah.
And he kicks off this whole lecture with a story. You're going to love this. It's about little Hans.
Little lump.
Yeah. The classic psychology case study. Little Hans had this intense fear of horses, poor kid.
Yes, I'm vaguely remembering this one.
And, well, it just so happens his dad was really into Freud. And Freud, as you can imagine, he saw phallic symbols.
Everywhere.
Exactly. So little Hans and his horse phobia, it became this whole case study for Freud's theories. The Oedipal complex, subconscious desires, the whole shebang. They were saying this kid's fear of horses stemmed from some deep-seated issues with his dad.
Right, and Nogueras uses this as a starting point to kind of unpack our obsession with finding these hidden, complex meanings in everything.
It's like we're wired to overcomplicate things.
In a way, yes.
Hmm.
But Nogueras' point is that sometimes the simplest explanation is the best one. We don't always need to dig for these profound, buried reasons for our behavior.
Okay, so maybe Freud went a little too deep with the whole horse thing. But what about this idea that our minds are like icebergs? Just a tiny bit visible above the surface and this massive subconscious lurking beneath.
Yes, the classic iceberg analogy.
Yeah.
It's a compelling image. But Nogueras isn't convinced. He prefers a different analogy. The jazz musician.
A jazz musician.
Exactly. Think about how a jazz musician improvises. They have a melody, a theme, but they riff on it. They create variations in the moment based on their skill, their feelings, and even the energy of the audience.
So you're saying our minds are kind of like that, just constantly riffing on our experiences and memories?
In a way, yes.
Right.
We draw on what we know, what we've experienced, but each thought, each action is also a unique creation formed in the moment.
Okay, so we're not just robots running on autopilot. There's some improvisation happening up there.
Absolutely. And that's where things get really interesting. Because if our minds are essentially making it up as we go along...
That's both terrifying and exciting at the same time.
Exactly. It means we have a lot more flexibility, a lot more potential for change and adaptation than we might realize.
I like the sound of that. But hold on, if we're constantly improvising, doesn't that mean our perception of the world is also kind of made up?
To some extent, yes. We tend to think we see the world in this complete, objective way. But the reality is our perception is actually quite limited.
That's where that whole gorilla in the basketball game experiment comes in, right?
Precisely. That experiment perfectly illustrates how our attention is incredibly selective. People are so focused on counting basketball passes.
They completely miss the guy in the gorilla suit walking right through the middle of it all.
Exactly. And it's not just about missing gorillas. This selective attention shapes our perception of everything.
So what you're saying is, we're all walking around missing gorillas left and right. That's both hilarious and slightly terrifying.
Well, think about it this way. If we can miss something so obvious, so unexpected, what else are we missing in our everyday lives? What subtleties, what important details are we filtering out simply because our attention is focused elsewhere?
It makes you wonder how much we're actually taking in. And if we're missing so much, how do we know what's real?
That's a question for the ages, isn't it? But it's something to ponder as we delve deeper into Nogueras' theories. Because if our perception of the world is this constructed thing...
And what about our emotions? Surely our feelings are coming from a deeper, more authentic place, right?
Well, not so fast. Nogueras argues that even our emotions are, in a way, constructed in the moment.
Wait, what? You're telling me my heartbreak isn't real?
It's not that our feelings aren't real, but rather that our physical sensations are just the starting point. Is our interpretation of those sensations, colored by the context, that determines how we label and experience them.
Okay, so walk me through this. How are my emotions not just, well, my emotions?
Think about it this way. You experience a physical sensation, like a tightness in your chest, a racing heart, or even a lump in your throat. Those are all real physical reactions. But it's your brain that interprets those sensations as sadness, as anger, as excitement, whatever the case may be.
So you're saying my brain is essentially playing emotional Mad Libs, just filling in the blanks based on whatever's going on around me.
In a way, yes. And this is where things get really fascinating because it suggests that our emotions are much more fluid and open to interpretation than we might realize.
This is blowing my mind here. So, if our perception of the world is a bit of a construction project and our emotions are up for interpretation, what about this whole idea of a unified self? That sense of who we are at our core.
That's where things get really interesting. Nogueras argues that this idea of a solid, unchanging self might be more of an illusion than a reality.
Okay, now you're just messing with me. If there's no me in here, then who's driving this thing?
To understand Nogueras' perspective, we have to dive into some groundbreaking research on split-brain patients. These are individuals who, to treat severe epilepsy, have had the connection between their brain hemispheres surgically severed.
Okay, split brain patients. This is where things always get a little wild in the world of neuroscience.
Precisely. And Nogueras uses these cases to illustrate just how remarkable, and perhaps how misleading, our brains can be in creating a sense of a unified self.
All right, I'm hooked. Give me the details. What happens when you split a brain in two? Does everyone turn into Sybil?
Not exactly. What's fascinating is that many split-brain patients function remarkably well in their daily lives. But there are these intriguing quirks, these moments where the disconnect between the two hemispheres becomes strikingly apparent.
Okay, now you have to give me an example. What kind of quirks are we talking about?
One of the most famous experiments involves a split-brain patient, a chicken foot, and a snowy scene. It perfectly illustrates how our brains strive to create narratives, even when those narratives are based on incomplete information.
A chicken foot and a snowy scene. All right, you've officially piqued my curiosity. Tell me more.
So in this study, one hemisphere of a split-brain patient was shown a chicken foot, while the other saw a snowy scene.
Wait, so each half of the brain was seeing something completely different?
Precisely. And here's where it gets really interesting. When asked to choose a related image, the hand controlled by the snowy hemisphere picked a shovel.
Makes sense. Snow, shovel, you'd need that to clear a path. But what about the other hand? What did it pick?
That's the kicker. The hand controlled by the chicken foot hemisphere didn't pick a logical image. Instead, it picked a chicken.
A chicken. So one side picked a shovel for the snow and the other picked a chicken to go with the chicken foot. That's interesting. But how does that prove anything about a flat mind?
Because here's the thing. When asked to explain his choices, the patient, speaking from the hemisphere that saw the snow, gave a perfectly logical explanation. I need the shovel to clean out the chicken coop.
Hold on. The hemisphere that saw the snow, the one that picked the shovel, thought it needed to clean a chicken coop, but it never even saw a chicken foot.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And that's precisely what's so mind-boggling about this. The language center of his brain, completely unaware of the chicken foot image, essentially invented a narrative to explain the action of choosing the shovel.
Wow. So even though his brain was literally split in two, each side seeing something different, it still managed to create a cohesive story, even if that story was completely made up.
Precisely. And that, my friend, is a perfect example of how our flat minds work. We are constantly striving for coherence, for a seamless narrative, even when faced with conflicting information or, in this case, two completely separate realities playing out in our own heads.
So our brains are like master storytellers, always trying to make sense of things, even when they have to fudge the details of it.
Exactly. And this isn't just limited to split-brain patients. It's something our brains are doing all the time, filling in gaps, creating narratives, and often doing it so seamlessly that we don't even realize it's happening.
Which makes you wonder what else our brains are capable of.
Well, Nogueras has another experiment that's even more mind-bending, if you can believe it.
Lay it on me. I'm ready for more.
This one involves disappearing text, and it really highlights how much our brains are actively constructing our reality.
Okay, disappearing text. That sounds intriguing. Tell me more.
So in this study, participants are reading text on a screen. But here's the thing. As they're reading, most of the letters are constantly being swapped out for X's.
Wait, so the words are literally disappearing before their eyes. How are they supposed to read anything?
That's the crazy part. Most participants don't even notice.
You're kidding. Are you saying they just read through it like everything's normal?
Pretty much. Their brains, focused on understanding the meaning, just fill in the missing letters automatically.
Wow, that's incredible. It's like our brains have this autocorrect feature for reality.
Exactly. And it shows just how much of what we perceive is actually being constructed by our minds.
Okay, so our brains are filling in the blanks, creating a seamless experience, even when there are gaps in the information. That's wild.
It is. And this leads to a really interesting question. If our minds are constantly constructing our reality like this, How much control do we really have over our own thoughts and beliefs?
That's a bit of a scary thought, isn't it?
It can be. And Nogueras takes it even further. He talks about how even our deeply held beliefs, like our political views, for example, might be more malleable than we think.
Okay, now you're really freaking me out. You mean to tell me my political opinions are just a construction of my mind, too?
Well, he brings up this fascinating study. It was done in Sweden. They asked people about their political views, their stance on economic policies specifically.
Okay, standard political survey. Got it.
Right. But here's the twist. After people filled out the surveys, the researchers secretly swapped their answer sheets with those of other participants who held opposing views.
Hold on, they gave people different answers. Like literally put different answers in their hands.
Exactly. And the really mind-blowing thing is, the majority of people didn't even notice the switch.
Get out of here, are you serious?
I'm totally serious. They accepted the swapped answers as their own, and even came up with explanations for why they held those beliefs.
So they went from, say, being pro-tax to anti-tax without even realizing it.
It seems that way.
Hmm.
And it really makes you question just how much control we have over our own beliefs, even ones that we feel very strongly about.
Wow, I'm completely speechless. This is huge. Are you telling me our beliefs are just floating out there waiting for someone to come along and swap them around?
Well, Nogueras' point isn't that our beliefs are meaningless, but rather that we need to be aware of how susceptible they are to influence, even subtle influences that we might not be conscious of.
It's like our minds are playing this constant trick on us, making us think we're in control, when really we might be more easily swayed than we realize.
In a way, yes. And that's why Nogueras stresses the importance of being critical thinkers, of questioning our own assumptions, and being open to the possibility that we might be wrong, even about things we feel certain of.
Okay, so we've talked about how our perceptions can be selective, our emotions can be interpreted in different ways, and even our beliefs might not be as stable as we think they are.
And all that ties into Nogueras' idea of the flat mind, this idea that there isn't necessarily a deep, unchanging core to who we are.
Right, so if we're not just our beliefs, our memories, our perceptions, then who are we? What makes us us?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And to answer it, we need to explore how Nogueras redefines the concept of self in the context of a flat mind.
So where do we go from here? If our sense of self is constantly evolving, does that mean we have no real control over who we become?
That's where things get really interesting. Nogueras' idea isn't about a lack of control. It's more about understanding the nature of that control.
Okay, so it's not like we're just along for the ride, our personalities being tossed about by whatever life throws at us.
Not at all.
Yeah.
It's more like, imagine you're a jazz musician. Again, you have your instrument, you've practiced your scales, you know your way around a melody.
But in the moment, you're improvising. You're responding to the other musicians, the energy of the room, even your own mood that day.
Exactly. And just like that jazz musician, we bring our own history, our experiences to every situation, but we're also constantly adapting and responding in the moment.
So our sense of self, it's not this fixed point. It's more like this dot process, always evolving.
Precisely. And that's where agency comes in. It's not about having complete control over every thought and feeling. It's about understanding the forces that shape our experiences and using that awareness to make conscious choices.
So we're not just puppets. We're more like dot co-creators of our own lives, working with the materials we've been given.
I like that analogy. And that's a much more empowering way to think about it, don't you think?
Definitely. But it still leaves me with this question. If our memories are malleable, if our perceptions can be skewed, how can we be sure of anything? How do we trust our own judgment?
That's the paradox, isn't it? And Nogueras doesn't shy away from it. He embraces the idea that our understanding of ourselves and the world is always a work in progress.
So it's less about finding the right answers and more about being open to the possibility that our current understanding might be incomplete.
Exactly. It's about holding our beliefs a little more loosely, being willing to update them as we encounter new information.
That makes sense. But it's also a bit daunting, isn't it, to think that maybe, just maybe, our memories aren't perfect recordings of the past, but more like dot interpretations?
Absolutely. And I think that's where mindfulness comes in, paying attention to our thoughts and feelings without judgment, noticing how our minds tend to jump to conclusions or fill in the blanks.
So it's about becoming more aware of the stories we tell ourselves, the narratives we create about our own lives.
Precisely. And once we start to recognize those narratives, we can start to question them. Are they helpful? Are they based on assumptions rather than facts?
This whole flat mind idea, it's really making me rethink how I view myself and the world around me.
It's a powerful concept, and I think ultimately it's a hopeful one. If we acknowledge that our minds are constantly constructing and reinterpreting our reality.
Then we have the power to change that reality, to shift our perspective, to rewrite our own stories.
Exactly. We're not stuck with the stories we've been telling ourselves. We can choose to create new ones, ones that are more empowering, more aligned with who we want to be.
Well, this has been quite the deep dive. I feel like I've learned so much about the brain, about consciousness, about what it means to be human.
Me too. And I hope our listeners feel the same way. It's been a pleasure exploring these fascinating ideas with you.
And with you. To our listeners, we hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity and maybe even challenged some of your assumptions about how your own mind works. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and remember, reality is what you make it.